Hey guys, Wolf Wangler. I was thinking yesterday about the little details of simple stuff. Like when you take the carburetor off, there's so many little nuances that take place that I don't know if you're aware of all of them, so I'll just kind of show you what I go through and think about it. Just pulling the carburetor off, simple little task. Let me get the air cleaner off first. First thing that's going to happen is you have to take the fuel lines off, or at least the first way I do it. And I need a 7/8 and a 3/4 inch wrench for that. While we're in the toolbox here, look at that Mac wrench right there. It's a 1-inch wrench. It's a nice flat wrench. It's really easy to get in. Here's an old Craftsman tappet wrench. Another thin wrench. Thin wrenches are handy to have. But right now we need the 7/8 and the 3/4. Well, it takes 2 wrenches. You need the 3/4 on the carburetor inlet fitting so that you don't loosen that up. And then the 7/8 loosens up the AN fitting. And I'll do that on both ends. Just get them loose. Now the next key is that you want to undo them. I'm doing this one hand, but usually you do this 2 hands. You want to undo them evenly, because if you just undo one side, you're twisting the fitting down and it makes the other side hard to come off. So I'm undoing the AN fittings, and then at the same time I'm reaching down to the vacuum line on the distributor. I'm taking the vacuum line off the distributor. You don't just pull it off, you give it a little twist, just to make sure that it's loose, and then it comes right off. With the vacuum line off, I'm done on this side of the carburetor. Take the fuel line out of the way, and you notice there's no fuel leaking out of the fuel line because it's returned back in the regulator already. It's sat up here and it's returned. It's probably down to this level or so in the fuel system. Now I'm over on the other side of the carb. Got to take the linkage off and the return spring. I've got a ball type snap on the linkage. That comes off pretty easy. And the return springs are a pain in the ass, but they come off too. Now we're down to the 4 nuts that hold the carburetor on, and I'm using ARP hardware. And one of the things about ARP hardware you notice is there's a top side to the nut and a top side to the washer. The top side of the nut, got to look real carefully, is stamped ARP. You can see it right there at about 7 o'clock. I don't know if I can get much closer with this camera and keep the focus. But there's that ARP nut with the stamping on it. And I'll get those off. And I'll take those 4 nuts off in the usual cross pattern. I start on the back where the throttle stop is, and then I go to the front corner, and then I go across, and I loosen them up in 2 stages. I don't just loosen them up all the way on each one. It just relieves the stress on the ears of the base plate right down here. If you're going to break something on your carburetor, you're going to snap that off if you don't have it tightened equally and you've got too soft of a gasket under it, or you flex it anyway. So I always try and do things in a cross pattern. Hang on. That's going to take a 1/4 inch ratchet with a 1/2 inch socket on it, and I'm coming to the back side and I give it a 1/2 a turn, and I come to the front side and I give it a 1/2 a turn, and then I go across here a 1/2 a turn, and I go this side a 1/2 a turn, and after that you can loosen everything up. It's just getting the feel for everything. Okay, there's the nut that you can see behind the accelerator pump, and I've got it loose, and if I just spin my ratchet up until the nut's loose and I get my finger down underneath it, once again I'm in the way blocking everything, then I've got the nut real easy. Well, I'm taking these all off. Comes up pretty easy. Augustus, come here, pup. Yeah. Okay, the nuts are off, And now we're at the most dangerous part of this whole procedure. We're going to lift the carburetor off of the engine. Why is this dangerous? Because the washers are still on the studs. And they're stainless steel washers, so I can't just take my magnet like I do on the valve cover nuts and run the magnet around in a circle. I can't pick them up with a magnet. So I got to pick the whole carburetor up. And the dangerous part is, if you do something stupid, now's the time one of those washers will fall down the intake manifold, and if Murphy's Law is in force, it will roll right on down to the cylinder where the valve is open and ka-clunk, drop right in on top of the piston. And you're not getting it out any other way than take the head off or some sort of really expensive laparoscopic procedure. So carburetor comes up, comes out of the way, the vacuum line is loose already, and I'm not doing shit with one hand here. Did you hear that noise? Did you hear that little one hand here? Here's what it was. While I was screwing around, the washer on the back ear here came off. So now's a good time to talk about the washers. Luckily the washer just fell down in the ground. Now's a good time to talk about the washers, and here it's easy to see. There's a rounded side and there's a flat side, and the flat side goes towards the engine, goes on the base of the carburetor. It's pretty much the same as head bolts. The washers that go into the head bolts have a flat side and a rounded side, and usually there's a little recess for the shoulder on the bolt through part of the washer as well. When you put those washers on, if you're going to use any kind of lube to torque your head bolts down, the key is to only put the lube on the top of the washer, or better yet on the bottom of the bolt. You don't want the whole washer lube, because then that whole washer is going to turn and it's going to affect your torque. So got off the subject a little bit on carburetors, but we've through the dangerous part, and now we can deal with what we really were going to deal with, and that was changing the gasket for the metering block. And there's an interesting little side story on this, and I'll tell it to you in a minute. Okay, so putting the carburetor back on, got it in place. If you have it cocked one way or the other, now's the time to do that. It's only a slight movement, but a little turn that way or a little turn that way. This way maybe takes a little bit away from that back cylinder. This way maybe gives it all it's got. So a little adjustment, you'll figure that out. But I like to do this back nut here first and put the throttle all the way wide open and put it against the throttle stop. It should be adjusted so it's just right. And then I like to snug this one down first just a little bit. Then I go back to across the other one. I'm back here again. Yeah, that's where that belongs. Now I'm going cross, 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 cross. And I'm doing this with a 1/4-inch wrench, and I'm not putting a lot of torque on it. I'm just snugging them down comfortably. I run a Felpro gasket underneath the carburetor. It's got a little bit of flex to it, so it seals pretty good. And I go over this a bunch of times. It's kind of like setting a 4-corner idle. You go over it a bunch of times. One other thing to notice is this little gasket here that seals the air cleaner against the carburetor. This is made out of an old base gasket. There's enough material in the base gasket to cut a round gasket for the top. So we got that much on. Now the springs go back on, the return springs. That side's easy. This side is never easy. And then the throttle linkage goes back on. And I'm checking. Even though everything's set, I'm still looking down the carburetor, making sure that everything's wide open. Fuel lines and we're done. Well, fuel lines and the vacuum line for the distributor. Snug that on first. Again, tightening both of these up at the same time, bringing it up at the same time. I'll show you the video on that from this side here. And this is what I was talking about. If I snug one side up, see the way this gets at an angle, it starts coming up? That makes it harder to get the other side equal, especially if you've got a solid fuel log in between. So I'm tightening both of these and I'm bringing it up. You see how nice it comes up evenly. And then once that's set up, again, just snug up that line. Just snug up that line and we're done. Now what I do next is I'd turn on the electric fuel pump and I'd pump the accelerator pumps until I got fuel out of the secondaries and the primaries, so that way it's ready to start. And it's important to fill up that secondary pump, because if you get out, just start it up with the primary, you get out, the first time you stand on it, it'll fall on its face because it's got no squirt from the secondaries. Secondary pumps come in handy for a lot of little fine things. They really help you with tuning your carburetor. And next time I start this, I'll take it out of tune and adjust it back in, and you can watch. I don't know if that'll be soon. It might be in a couple days. Bye-bye. Let's go, Brandon.